When I landed at Le Bourget a few weeks ago, I landed with the expectancy and the hope of being able to see Europe. It was the first time I had ever been abroad, and I wasn't in any hurry to get back.
Perhaps I'm prejudiced, but to me it seems that no other phase of modern progress contrives to maintain such a brimming measure of romance and beauty coupled with utility as does aviation.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. It's so awful. Its eyes are black and they gleam like a serpent. The mouth is kind of V-shaped with saliva dripping from its rimless lips that seem to quiver and pulsate, and the monster or whatever it is can hardly move. It seems weighed down by possibly gravity or something. The thing's rising up now and the crowd falls back. There's seen plenty. That's most extraordinary experience, ladies and gentlemen. I can't find words.
Oh, the humanity!
Okay, we've had a problem here.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Okay, just to let you know, we saw a huge, tremendous amount of black smoke south of Long Island.
When he got on a plane in Portland, Oregon last night, he was just another passenger who gave his name as D.A. Cooper. But today, after hijacking a Northwest Airlines jet, ransoming the passengers in Seattle, then making a getaway by parachute somewhere between there and Reno, Nevada, description on one wire service, master criminal.
We have a report relayed through the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded.
The Singapore government has responded to the preliminary findings of Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council following the crash of SQ-006.
That's it.
Yeah. This just in, you are looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center.
The preceding were some Morris matters of the past. Now join us in the den of discussion to listen to and talk about Morris matters occurring currently and anticipate those that will affect us in the future. Let's make history together. This broadcast is hosted by an independent thinker and speaker who will show you why Morris matters should matter to you. We have the pleasure next of talking to Councilman Joe Betar of the 3rd Ward in the city of Utica. Joe, how are you?
Good. I want to thank you for having me on the program.
Well, I thank you for coming on. It's always appreciated. I'm sure this will be one of many times we get you on to talk about a variety of subjects. Now, I did, in arranging this interview, I did give you a heads up because we're going to talk about the St. Elizabeth's redevelopment project, which everybody, not only in South Utica, I think, but in the city of Utica, thinks is a very important project. So the first question I have is, what role or part does the Common Council play in the development of St. Elizabeth's? The redevelopment, I should say.
Well, I think in part that question will depend on where we take the process as a city. And I can give an example. Let's say if money is expended or transferred by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, the Board of E&A, then any transfer over $15,000 would first need to be approved by the council. Now, in this case, if $20,000 was transferred from one budget line to another to potentially cover cost of site cleanup, if the city were to get involved, then that's an example of where the council would need to first approve the action. Another potential I can think of is the city deciding that it would be best to become involved in any demolition, perhaps. And if the city wanted to take out a bond and pay for those costs, then the council would first likely have to approve that by bond ordinance and in compliance with local finance law. So that's another example of where there may be a need for common council approval, depending, again, on where the project goes. But Richard, as you mentioned, and I agree with you when you say it's not just a South Utica issue, the redevelopment of St. Elizabeth's, it's citywide. So apart from any official involvement from the council, I think it's important for the council to stay connected to the residents throughout this process, regardless of whether council representatives are at large and represent folks on a citywide basis or represent a certain district in the city. Because while the campus is in South Utica, again, this really is a citywide issue, and showing that the entire council continues to speak with residents and receive feedback, I think that will only make our position stronger as we do move through the process.
Okay, well, that's a perfect lead into my next question, but I do have a short question beforehand. Did you go to the first public meeting in November?
I did, back on, I believe, November 16th at the Parkway Recreation Center. Right.
Okay, so I think, well, this is the lead into the question. What is your understanding of what the neighbors want to happen with regards to St. E's? And do your thoughts differ at all? Because one point I'll add is, after the first public hearing, I think there was a WTF from the collective room.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there to unpack. So in November, we did have the first public meeting on the future of the campus. And what we got back then was one option, which was a total repurpose of existing structures, including the main building, which I believe was built in 1917 or so, and repurposing of the parking garage, which was built in the 1950s. And the development team's idea, or what we were presented with at that time, was to convert the main building into roughly 200 to 250 apartments. And I think the development team's argument was to keep the historic tax credits because that would be important to a potential developer. Now, right. To answer your question, based on my observations and South Utica residents who I spoke with, the presentation did not go over too well from what I've heard. I think in large part because the public was only given one option, reuse of the 200 to 250 apartment units. Now, that being said, there was no other choice at that time. And, you know, I do want to add, let's not forget, I think in the city of Utica, there has been, over the past several years, a substantial number of apartment units added. For example, the Obelston Apartments, which I believe is actually a little over a mile away from St. Elizabeth's. That building has been rehabbed with over 150 apartment units. Several loft apartments have been added to the downtown area over the past several years. And affordable housing options are available in South Utica, such as Gilmore Village, and other apartment complexes also exist in South Utica. We can think of Hillcrest Manor Apartments on Oneida Street, as well as Georgian Court on Oneida Street. So I think that's certainly worth noting. Now, for me, ultimately, when I look at the future of the St. Elizabeth's campus, the first thing I do is look at the surrounding neighborhoods. Valentine Bray, Douglas Crescent, Proctor Boulevard, Bonnie Bray, Gear, and Ferris Avenue. Look at those surrounding neighborhoods and say, how do we come up with something where the old hospital campus can become a part of those neighborhoods? Can we integrate the look, the feel, the family-friendly neighborhood aspect? That's where I'm coming from, and that's the lens I'm looking through. Now, you also asked about what I've heard from South Utica residents. I've gotten a lot of feedback over the past year or so, and what I've heard was from a lot of people who have lived in South Utica for several years, in some cases several decades, who want to stay in South Utica, but can't because their house is too much to maintain, or multiple levels isn't doable anymore. And instead of being able to stay in South Utica, whether in a retirement community or other single level options, they're moving to New Hartford, they're moving to Clinton, places that do have the option, those options for our retirees. So really, with all this said, I would personally like to see a 55 plus community established on that property. I think it would give people an option to stay in South Utica, to stay in Utica, and simultaneously open up the market for younger families who have been searching for homes, or those who have moved to the area after getting a job. So to me, those two goals can be accomplished, allowing retirees to stay close and remain in our community, while also freeing up the inventory in the housing market for the next generation of South Uticans.
Well, I have to agree and disagree with Julian. I'll bring up both points. One is, I agree with him because we were talking that kind of senior living housing may go hand in hand with the school of nursing. You know, maybe there could be some role for them as to, I don't know how old or how infirm the people would be, but there might be a nice connection there.
I agree with that, and I think I believe the School of Nursing is remaining open, and that's part of, I think, going through this process. What I would like to see, because it is nice, it would be nice to maintain that School of Nursing and have it open for part of the reasons exactly what you said, especially if it's a 55 plus community where there are some assisted living options on the campus or otherwise. I think it would accomplish a lot of goals of. I believe nursing students need to have a certain number of clinical credits, for example, and that may help with that aspect while also helping the retirees or the residents of such a community. So I think that would be a good idea to maintain the School of Nursing.
Now, where people disagree with Mr. Julian, it seems, is that older section, the more historic section of St. Elizabeth's Hospital, seems to be key for many reasons, chief among them economics of redevelopment and those historic credits, because Mr. Julian, as we talked about, sort of wants the city county to sort of take it all and demolish the whole thing and starts from scratch. But I guess people are bringing up that without those historic credits, that may be a big impediment to a developer having sufficient economics to complete any project.
Sure, and that's part of what we saw during the presentation in November, the emphasis on the historic tax credits that would come along with maintaining those older structures. That being said, I believe we're in a position now where an opportunity like this may never come again, where we're talking about 18 or 19 acres in the heart of South Utica on Genesee Street, the main entrance really to the city. And I think we do have to take a step back and understand, and take this for example. The main structure, as we mentioned, was built in 1917. And here we are 100 years later, more than 100 years later, talking about what to do with it next. So my point is, whatever we decide to do here will likely impact South Utica and Utica for the next 100 years. So while I can understand the position of wanting to maintain those historic tax credits, we are presented with a unique opportunity where if demolition is on the table, it may allow us to build anew and transition South Utica to the next chapter. So I do understand both sides of that, but I do, based on what I know now at this point, do favor demolition because there are various options where we might be able to accomplish those goals that we talked about earlier, allowing a 55.
Are you talking demolition of everything except the School of Nursing?
Well, I will say we were presented with different options. Certain options revolved around entire reuse. Other options were presented of complete demolition, and there are also options somewhere in between. For example, the parking
No,
garage.
I'm asking what you favor, because you said demolition. Well, demolition can be part of the complex. It could be, the whole complex. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are.
At this point, I would say a substantial portion of the acreage there, the buildings, a substantial portion of it. And I think we would be better served perhaps having city or county involvement in helping with the cost of demolition, because it is also my opinion that without offering a site that is shovel ready, a developer is very unlikely to want to get involved in such a project. A developer would not want to, in my opinion at least, come into a project where they're going to be facing millions of dollars of cost related to demolition and then build anew, as opposed to coming into a site where they have the opportunity to build right out of the gate instead of encountering any cost of demolition. So I think that is something that we have to approach, whether there should
here's a big set of questions though that I don't have the answer to, and many people don't, and it really depends on what kind of funds I guess you're going to get, because everybody says and agrees that you're going to need some level of government funding. Now, unfortunately, once you get government funding, they usually have regulations or string attached to it. Now, the neighbors seem to really rule out what's called low income or affordable housing. But my question is, what kinds of government funds dictate that you would have to have these type of apartments?
Sure. So when we speak about government funding, I think we have to separate what level of government we're talking about. Are we talking about the city of Utica bonding for that money, including with the county, or are we talking about state and federal involvement? Because the latter two, with state and federal involvement, I would agree. I think more strings, as you mentioned, strings attached come with that type of money. So when I say government involvement, I'm referring to the local municipality and possibly the county. And I think it's important that if we are talking about government involvement, to perhaps keep it at that level, because this is a local, in the city of Utica and in the county, this is a local structure that has been in South Utica and in the city of Utica for many, many years. So we may be better served keeping it as a Utica and county funded program. And generally, I'll tell you, it's my position that government should not be dictating which businesses go where and which businesses should sell or buy. And that's the first point. But to me, that only goes so far. When there are projects in the area that will most certainly have a lasting impact on the city, there's a substantial public interest involved. And the government, in my opinion, should, on behalf of the residents, be involved in finding the best use for such a large property. And I believe that's the situation we're in here, where, again, we're talking about 18 or 19 acres in the heart of South Utica. So we may be better served with the city of Utica and the county coming together in a collaboratory fashion to figure out how to best fund at least a possible demolition or a site cleanup of this area to make it more appealing for an eventual developer to come in and take charge of the project after that.
Well, I won't get into it any further than that, just to say that with a 14% increase of taxes, Utica residents may be very reluctant to spend either more money, even if it's bonded. But I wanted to go to this steering committee. Now you're on it and you got to select a person as well. I was very impressed, and I've been talking about this to other members of the steering committee as I interview them. I was very impressed by the breadth of knowledge of the individuals and of their activity. In other words, they've been pretty active in the area of South Utica and the community. You got to sort of tip your hat to Galimi and the chief of staff, right?
Well, I'll say the steering committee, I agree with you. The steering committee is made up of a range of residents, from elected officials, South Utica residents with a host of different backgrounds, including education, finance, real estate, the healthcare field. So really a wide array of backgrounds, which is nice because everyone has a different experience or different perspective, which is important. So as far as that goes, and I could take you through the last steering committee a bit, many questions were asked, ranging from issues related to the historic tax credits to questions regarding feasibility of certain options. So the steering committee had the chance to and did ask several important questions, and I think that goes to the makeup of the steering committee. Those residents who are involved, who have these different backgrounds, who are able to think through these important issues and ask the important questions. So I do appreciate the makeup of the steering committee, and I had the pleasure of meeting all of them recently. Those who I have not met prior, meet them recently, and was very impressed by the makeup of the committee.
But I want to expand upon that a little further. What do you really think is the function of the steering committee? And do you think the powers that be, whoever they may be, are going to take their advice? In other words, how much clout do you think this committee will have in influencing governmental opinion?
Well, I think the mayor, of course, I can't speak for the mayor, but I think the mayor is very serious about this committee having input. And I get the idea from our current administration that they did want to see more options from the development team, perhaps options that, again, included demolition, reuse, or a combination of the two. I think that goes to the administration's vision of wanting this committee, again, to be involved, to be a conduit for the residents, not only in South Utica, but the city as a whole. So I would like to see the committee stay involved and speak to residents as they have been to get the general feel of what folks want to see. And in terms of actual clout, I think by asking those important questions during these steering committee meetings, we're continuing to give ideas perhaps to the development team that maybe not all these issues were thought of, but by asking these questions and going through these things, I think it shows that we're staying involved as a committee, and we do have a say in which direction the development team really explores.
Well, on that encouraging note, we'll end our conversation, but I'm sure there'll be many more. I guess the next public meeting, it was supposed to be in March, but I guess we're going to have it in April. Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding as well. And I will say, given that obviously there's a new mayor, a new administration, I understand that the new administration probably wanted some time to transition and understand the issues and meet with the development team. So I am being told that the next public hearing, or public meeting rather, will be in April.
Well, Councilman Joe Betar, thanks for spending a few minutes with us, and I'm sure this won't be our last conversation.
Thanks again for having me.
We're talking next to John Brown. He's another member of the St. Elizabeth's Steering Committee. And John is a well-known figure because he's been associated for many years with a realtor company. John, welcome to the show. And also, why don't you briefly tell people a little bit about yourself, what company you're associated with, and your realty experience?
Well, I own Coldwell Banker Faith Properties, which is not only the largest residential real estate company in the Mohawk Valley with nearly 80 agents and 3 offices, all in the Mohawk Valley, based in South Utica. I am a 5th generation Greek American from Utica, New York, and I grew up in a family business in downtown Utica. I had a quick run of the restaurant business when in my early 20s, I took the towpath in Ilion. And and was kind of scolded badly for getting into a foreclosure by my family, but it all worked out, and I was back in the will when I opened the Whiffletree Inn in the early 1980s, at a time when Ilion had a hospital, Herkimer had a hospital, Remington was owned by DuPont and employed 2,000 people. Union Fork and Hoe was up and running. MDS was still a boom in the the original Silicon Valley, which is really naturally the Mohawk Valley, which people don't even embrace. And there was a different sense of life in Herkimer County. But growing up in downtown Utica in a multi-generational family that changed their name to assimilate, my family was here before Poles, Irish, Italians, so one Greek was an oddity, and therefore the name Brown anglicized him very quickly. I returned to the Mohawk Valley by choice. I'm fortunate I grew up in a stimulating environment of business and family that had a love of the Adirondacks and skiing and boating and everything that makes the lifestyle here so attractive. Going forward, I had a life-changing car accident, which rendered me pretty much in rehab for 14 months. And when I came out of it, a couple of my friends that were real estate brokers said, "Why don't you think about going into this?" And I really stopped to think a while, but I'm glad I did, and it's turned out to be a wonderful career for me. It's my 34th year in real estate. I ended up acquiring the company I work for as its top agent almost 18 years ago, and I have taken us through, quadrupled the volume of business, and today Coldwell Banker Faith is the oldest Coldwell Banker in New York State and recognized consistently as one of the top producing offices by number of sales per agent. We carry about a 20% market share throughout the Mohawk Valley, which is a huge market share, and we are the local, but more importantly, South Utica. I grew up in New Hartford, but I choose and have chosen to live in South Utica for over 30 years. And I love it. I also used to live adjacent to St. Elizabeth's. I grew up with a dad that was on the board. I used to park cars for all the nuns' fundraisers and then later bartend for them all. And, you know, being Greek Orthodox, there were many Greek Easters where Sister Rose Vincent and Sister Regina, because the holidays are different, would be at our house gathering. So St. Elizabeth's has always been part of our kind of our bloodline here. My dad grew up in South.
Well,
Everybody's
before we get to the St. Elizabeth's, let me just ask you one further question about real estate. So obviously you've done millions and millions of dollars of business, and you've also done commercial as well as residential, correct?
Yes, but my primary practice really is residential. But I have certainly participated in a lot of, and you know, interestingly, all my commercial deals, although I sell lots of expensive and lots of inexpensive homes, I have plowed through a number of commercial properties and have a history. And don't forget, I also grew up in a family that was housing oriented. During my childhood, my father owned Georgian Courts and Woodside Apartments in South Utica, if you know where those are,
Yes.
and grew up in, you know, in a work ethic family that had a lot of employees around New York State with various businesses.
Are
But
you a licensed appraiser?
no,
Okay.
I am a licensed real estate broker, and I don't believe the two mix, although the appraisers and realtors have a commonality of learning about values. My job is more to see what people will pay. An appraiser's job is to give really more what will a bank finance based on value.
Mm-hmm.
There's sometimes a big disparity between both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So they are two different, like commercial real estate, residential real estate, appraisal and sales. They're all different animals. But I feel fairly competent just because, you know, I'm in the thousands of transactions closed, and you know, I'm happily at a point where I've got a lot of miles on me, and I've observed the Mohawk Valley my entire life
All
and
right,
its patterns.
let's get to the issue at hand. We're talking about what's going to happen with St. Elizabeth's. As most people know, the hospital has been closed, as well as St. Luke's, and now we're one big happy hospital, I guess, in downtown Utica. And did you go to the first public meeting on this?
I was not able to because I was not in the area. I was away for a rare little occasion, and I'm going away again, so I hope I don't miss any more meetings.
Well, from what you've heard, what were your impressions of what you heard? Because the impressions I got, quite frankly, the neighbors, it wasn't what they were expecting.
Well, I mean, and rightly, we all, and this is without any disrespect to any administration, there hasn't been a lot of deep-rooted trust in government decisions, whether they be local or national. And here in the Mohawk Valley, especially tender with South Utica, is coming off the debacle. See, it would seem to me that we have a community that, first of all, needs to have good public relations. The biggest thing about the meeting you refer to was that they should have said in the onset that we are not discussing any public housing forums, which would be, first of all, have everybody take a little bit of a sigh of relief, because there's great concern in South Utica, especially in those little treasured Olmsted neighborhoods that we have, that all of a sudden there's going to be public housing. We've had candidates in the past in the city think this makes a great place. Let's bring an asylum city to you. I mean, good Lord. And if you sat with any economic development groups and watched the number of exciting projects that are before them in Herkimer, Madison, and Oneida County, we keep getting public housing, public housing, public housing, millions to rejuvenate public housing. And where the real weakness in our community is an availability of market rate housing, single family or cluster housing, that is not tied to special entitlements. This isn't me being anti-Section 8 or anything like that. You know, it's the same thing I ask the residents of Sunset Ave, and I've asked everybody at the city, if the Kelberman Apartments had been localized to autistic with a mix of seniors, would there have been such blowback? And everybody says, no, 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 no. Well, once again, seniors have a need for housing in our community. I think if we're going to do big housing projects at this point, they should be designed for seniors. The
Well, what
hospital is
is
a different. The hospital is a different angle.
well,
You've
well,
got
let me
this.
ask you though, what is your understanding of what the neighbors want at St. E's, and do your thoughts differ at all from that?
The neighbors want what's not practical. The neighbors, I want what's not practical. What would I want? I'd love to see a Craftsman renovated district with the entire hospital complex completely removed. That'll cost 20 to 30 million dollars. The money's not coming out of anywhere. And I'd love to see another redesign of an Olmsted neighborhood going up, and also, you know, compatible with Ballantyne Bray, which still has gems of homes going up Ballantyne in
Mm-hmm.
Craftsman Vintage, and extending the Craftsman district of Beverly Place, Tarbell Terrace, Farview Heights, and the Proctor Boulevard, or as I call it, Hospital Heights neighborhoods of Bonnie, Ferris, Gear, Douglas, and Proctor Boulevard. It's not
Mm-hmm.
going to happen, because by the time you put
Right.
it in and how many houses you put in, you're going to be, by the time they throw estimates out at $900,000 a unit, it's not what it's going to sell for, but what the project will cost per house. It's cost prohibitive. And what
Well,
unfortunately,
the other thing is, I agree with you that the economics of it, but part of the reason that they talked about historic credits and keeping part of the building is namely to get those credits to help the developers finance the project. What do you think
yes.
about the necessity of keeping at least that part of the building?
Well, I mean, you know, we have to be open to it. I mean, my first and I think the neighborhood's first and most important thing is to keep it market rate. And I know people might cringe at that, not below market rate. This has to be a free market kind of private housing development for it to keep the neighborhood strong. This is the last bastion. You know, we have great neighborhoods within the city, but we also know we have neighborhoods in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
This is a neighborhood that has not been in trouble. Part of it has been the creation of the hospital itself, regardless of the things that it might have been not wonderful to live next to the hospital for the noise, the helicopters, you know, all the, well, it also kept the neighborhood with a anchor of a solid factor, and allowing single family homes to be around a medical center was not a bad thing. The neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
developed. What we have to be careful is to not allow this project to change the flavor of any of the neighborhoods. It has to
Well,
enhance them.
one question I have, though, and I don't know the answer to this, maybe you have a clearer understanding, but I'm wondering, in order to get government funds, and apparently some government funds are going to be needed for this project, at least that's what was presented to us at the first public meeting. I'm wondering, when you take government funds, does a project developer have to have some kind of low income or what they call affordable apartments?
I think there's different in certain government funding, you have to. And there's government funding that does not. This is why the historic application would be to let a private developer do market rate, I mean, what the market will bear for apartments. And
Mhm.
right now, townhouses, apartments, condominiums have never sold higher, and we're in a serious housing shortage. Drive down, there's no houses for sale in your neighborhood. There's none for sale in mine. I live in Ridgewood. And
Mhm.
if there's a for sale sign in front of them, they have an offer in 24 to 48 hours if it's priced right.
Mm.
So we have no new construction. The community was devoid of construction. You might remember the history we have. When the rest of the country was doing double-digit inflation of property values in the mid-1990s during the Clinton administration, we crashed. The
Yeah.
base closed. Lockheed Martin left. Chicago Pneumatic left. We lost the largest employer in upstate New York, Lockheed Martin, General Electric, Aerospace, the highest per capita white collar jobs in our community, plus with the best benefit package. And then we lost Chicago Pneumatic Tool and Die, which everybody seems to forget, the highest paid blue collar workers. If you were a lathe operator at Chicago Pneumatic in 1993, you were still making more than a lathe operator working at Remington when it was a DuPont owned company.
Mm-hmm.
So losing that vacuum, our real estate market went from single family home sales of 1,600 down to about 900 homes. So no one, we lost our builders, everybody vacated developments, nobody did anything. Well, guess what? We're in a rebirth. We have 2 generations later, they don't want their grandparents' houses. Housing has changed significantly.
Yes.
All the way around. And, you know, the other strange or interesting factor in housing, let us not forget, the more education they have, the higher their income, the less likely they are having children.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a baby boomer of the Mohawk Valley. My contemporaries all looked at the big McMansion as the sign of success.
Yeah.
It is a minimalistic society is not, those will only appeal to a smaller, each and every year, a smaller percentage of the population, not a greater population. You know, this is a population where, you know, we have energy costs and a changing world. We have an exploding demographic. And the hospital affords us now an opportunity to do some nice creative things. If we're going to keep the existing hospital building, and we all know it got added onto and added onto to the point that we all hoped and prayed nothing would ever happen, because if you work there, it was confusing getting around.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, it was, God forbid, we have a fire here. No one will know which elevator to go to, and then they won't know how to get out with it. Suffice to say, we needed a new hospital. No disrespect to St. E's. I loved it dearly. The School of Nursing still is a part of it. It stands on the land, and it's on, you know, I turn and look and say, well, how long will they be here? Because if you look at that, Johnson and Montney, the 2 most, probably after Bison Baird in our area, the 2 most progressive architects in the Mohawk Valley during the mid-century was Johnson and Montney. They brought that kind of modernistic thing that was so hot in the 60s and the 70s, and they built and designed the School of Nursing. If you look at the School of Nursing on Genesee Street, it's managed to blend in oddly with the hospital campus.
Yeah, very well.
And if you look at the building, and next time you drive by it, look at the balconies on the side, and I see luxury apartments all over it, because it's got an elevator, it's got an atrium, it's got an open courtyard, it has area for its own parking. And with condominiums at the Academy at Southgate, a former orphanage, and Utica Catholic Academy Girls School, still being in big demand because there is no competition, and they're nice. But this campus affords something completely brand new. If we could put up 150 homes in there, it would be fabulous. But I think we have to be more practical about the existing use of buildings. The convent up in the back, on the back right, if you know the campus well.
Yes.
The sisters used to be up on the right, and they had a retaining wall, and it kept on getting pushed back, and the Holy Garden kept on getting pushed back as the hospital grew. And then Marion Hall is another building ready to be retrofit. These are not ugly buildings with modern design added to it, or a look at a historic, creative
but I think we both agree, though, that it's going to be some kind of apartment condo project instead of single family house.
I don't think, and that is a two-sided. Unfortunately, it's the only way to be able to keep this project out of public housing or decline.
Now let me wrap up with you, John, because I wanted to ask you. You've been appointed to this committee, and by the way, I have to applaud the people that put this committee together, because as I look down the list, there's quite a varied group of professional people and a good mix of people that have some awareness of property and what should be done, and then you throw in a couple neighbors and so on and so forth. So I have to take my hat off to whoever got the people on board. But I have to ask you, what should the steering, or what is your understanding as to what the steering committee's function is going to be, and how much clout do you think it'll have?
Well, I attended one session on the steering committee, and my understanding is for a group of wide-eyed open citizens to look at the possibilities for what's going to be traditionally best all the way around. You know, I already told you what I want is not a feasible. I think we have to get over that.
Yeah.
So now we have to make the best of, again, a situation, and not say a bad situation. We need to turn this into a wonderful opportunity. Before we lose Uptown Utica, before we, sign off these areas as being still strong, viable neighborhoods, and I think we can increase them because a changing market will respond to sleek apartments. The possibility that we might be able to save part of the parking garage. I was not aware that it was savable, but someone has indicated it may be.
I think everyone, I think quite frankly, everyone was surprised, but they say it can be.
So if you throw enough money at something, anything can be saved. You could rebuild it in North Utica. But I mean, it's not going to let's see what the engineering reports bring. But there is an appeal to, if you're going to do condominiums and having covered parking and safe gated entrances and elevators to be able to easily maneuver yourself.
Well, I think they've already ruled out the gated community.
Well, no, yes, but I mean, within your parking area, it's going to have to be a secure. It'll be a secure area. You're not going to be able to enter a parking garage at 3 a.m, just to crash in the back.
Yeah.
It'll be secured by something, decals or something. It's not meaning. I'm all in favor, and I've consistently said I don't think it's a problem having a mixed use in here where I'd like to see some senior units.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll finish up and say, when people say, do you really think people will pay for it? With no disrespect to the manufactured home community on Route 5, just west of the intersection of 12B, I mean, Cherrywood and Applewood are out there. People are spending $300,000 in new, beautiful, manufactured, double-wide homes, put on permanent foundations with an attached garage and a porch, in an over 55 community where they don't own the land.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there will be some people that want to know they have real estate. Even as a condominium owner, you own a piece of the action.
Yes.
In a senior over 55 community, you are still subject to the management group, and the ability to live there is managed by how good is the management group that controls it. Because,
well, I'll ask you one last question. You're on the steering committee, and as I said, I'm quite impressed really with the members on there, quite good people. And I'm wondering, how much clout do you think you'll have? In other words, will they listen? Will the powers that be listen to you?
Well, I don't know if it's, the powers that be will hear whether they can make. I think the powers that be within this, and I'm thinking optimistically, I don't see this as being a totalitarian state. I think we've got some good watchdogs, with especially Ron Cacaro, who not only is a smart man, he lives in one of the most beautiful homes in his neighborhood that backs up directly to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And he's enjoyed life there all these years, as I did when I lived on Lower Proctor Boulevard, backing up to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
They want to maintain, I think the clout is that we have commonality with our current mayor, who's a believer in home ownership, and home ownership doesn't mean a single family home necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Townhouses, condominiums. It'd be great to have a few of the ancillary buildings. I mean, I drove through the hospital campus because as you know, most of it is still open for hospital parking for MVHS.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you drive in there with a little creativity. Who wouldn't want the boiler building?
Yeah.
It'd make the coolest loft in town.
Mm.
I think creatively there, and it'd be wonderful to see the Grand Lawn restored in front of the the campus.
Yeah.
You know, it'll be interesting to see things. I mean, the cloud is going to be how much will the community feed back? How much is the community willing to commit? How much can we sell up front? How many people are out there that will come forward and say, you give me 1,200 square feet that's affordable in a safe, clean, modern environment where I can be mixed. Not everybody wants to be surrounded by people of their own age.
Mm-hmm.
The healthiest communities are mixed.
Yeah,
And
and I see that concept as a definite possibility for this project. But I guess we'll wrap it up there, John. And I hope we can do this again after the second meeting, and maybe you'll share your thoughts then as to how much progress you think they're making, and do you think that the way they're going is feasible, and will it satisfy the neighbors? So I thank you very much for this interview, and I look forward to our next one.
Yeah, no problem. I look forward to it too. Anytime. I'm at your service.
We're going to talk now to another steering committee member, and that's St. Elizabeth Steering Committee. And it's a very interesting committee because it's tasked giving advice for a very interesting and important project in South Utica, and that's the redevelopment of St. Elizabeth's Hospital. And we're going to talk now to Ron Coccaro, and Ron is going to have to explain what his experience is, because I don't think too many people know what a public adjuster is, Ron. So could you explain?
A public adjuster is a adjuster who handles catastrophe losses on behalf of the policyholder, not the insurance company. And in the event of a fire, hurricane, a flood, earthquake, etc., the owner of the property has to file a claim, and a public adjuster would work on their behalf to assemble all the details, calculate the damages, prepare a claim, and then submit it to the insurance company and negotiate it on their behalf to get them the best possible settlement as quickly as possible.
So you're very much aware of properties and the cost and damages and all that thing, right?
Oh, sure. That's we
okay.
live and breathe construction costs.
Okay. So I was interested because looking down this list of the steering committee, I think you would agree that whoever put this together did a darn good job, because there's a lot of varied professionals with experience that if the public servants listed could really learn from their advice, I think. Do you agree?
Yes, but from my perspective, I'm really coming more from a position of being a neighbor, and what impact that this redevelopment could have on our neighborhood. I am right up against the hospital. I've been here, will be here now for close to 45 years. And so, we love our house and love our neighborhood. And there's been a long history of interactions between the neighbors and the hospitals to try to maintain our neighborhood in the course of their development that's occurred over the years. So
yeah, and we just talked off air a little bit. So let's talk on the air about that conservation easement.
Yeah, well, I think it was like 1989, somewhere around there. The hospital proposed a major expansion that would have developed more of the property, actually right up into the neighborhood. They bought some property up on Douglas Crescent, and they were going to come up through there and put a building right up on Douglas Crescent, which really concerned everybody because it was right across the street from the houses where our neighbors were. So it wasn't the first time that we had rallied together to kind of monitor the development, because the hospital had really expanded over the years. But this one was really a big project, and would have substantially changed our neighborhood and would have broken the barrier, I think, between a residential and a commercial location like a hospital. You know, we do have a barrier there, and once that was broken, heavens knows what would happen to the rest of the properties. And they had acquired most of the houses on Ballantine Bray. Down. They owned most of them. So, and they actually owned a house on Douglas Crescent. So it looks like they were planning on just keep moving. So, well, our neighbors got together and basically, after a long, protracted negotiation, we ended up establishing a conservation easement, which is a border that goes all around the property except on Genesee Street, and it varies in depth. And the purpose of that is to be forever wild and not to encroach on that in order to protect the neighborhood. And in order to maintain the easement, we had to establish a not-for-profit, which was a 501c, which is Citizens to Protect Our Neighborhood. And we set that up, and that organization holds the easement. And our only job is to make sure that stays intact. Unfortunately, it was violated back a few years after that, before the citizens actually held the easement. The city had it, and they took down that beautiful brick building on Genesee Street where the parking lot is now. And it came down, and we didn't even know about it. And then they put an entrance in across to Ballantine Bray, drove a lot of traffic that way. That was, and at that point, we realized we had to really grab a hold of this easement and enforce it, which we've done. So our main goal is to make sure that stays intact, that the hospital or the developer adheres to the agreements that the hospital made, and that they don't try to do anything in that particular area, add additional entrances and exits, or try to build anything on that.
What is your understanding as to what NVHS does with the houses that you mentioned?
Well, we were at a meeting last week, and what I heard was that they may possibly sell them to individuals, which would be great. The houses are occupied by nurses, right? Nursing students, right now.
Oh, is that who? That's who lives in them?
That's the purpose of them. There's a number of houses, and nursing students stay there, and that's kind of a transient occupancy, and it's not the best for a neighborhood like that. So if they do go into the hands of individuals,
could be worse though.
Yeah. If it goes into the hands of individuals, that would be great. So that's what I heard, that they now are going to. At one time they were going to hold on to them. Now I heard they probably will sell them, and they're not part of this redevelopment project because they're, it's not part of the hospital, and our easement goes between the two of them.
Okay, now I wanted to ask you. You've got appointed to this St. Elizabeth Steering Committee. What is your understanding as to the function, and how much clout or how much advice do you think they'll actually take?
Well, we've had our first meeting, and they were, the meeting was very open, and there was a lot of dialogue. I think they've listened to the advice of a lot of people. I mean, there's other people in the community that are providing input that are not on the steering committee, and there was a meeting held at the Parkway Center back a few months ago, and there are people who were very vocal about what they wanted and what they didn't want, and so everybody had a chance to provide their input. This was beyond the steering committee. There's another meeting that's going to be planned soon for open to the public, and they'll have a chance to respond to some plans that are being readied to present. And at our last meeting, the first meeting of the steering committee, our only meeting of the steering committee, we reviewed some of the options that were being considered. And I think the economics are going to determine what happens there, because it's an historic building, and some people have called for taking it down, and I think that's going to be very difficult to do. It's a historic building, and preservation requirements would require that it be kept, the original part be kept, the old part of the hospital.
Yeah, but not only that, but they may need that part of the building to keep it because they get historic tax credits, and that would benefit the developer.
That's why I said economic reasons, because it's going to be a very expensive project, and no developer, I don't believe any developer is going to do that without being able to access the historic tax credits. And if they didn't do that, they wouldn't be able to get money from any of the other state and national sources, granting entities, for anything, because they wouldn't have approval because they took down a historic building. So it looks like that, everything's going to pivot on that main old building, and so that's going to determine what happens after that. My opinion is it's not going to be able to be taken down.
Yeah,
and the development's going to have to circle around that particular building.
Did you go to the first public meeting?
Yes.
I wanted to ask you. You said you had one steering committee meeting and you had some options put in front of the committee. Was there anything new that was different from the first public meeting that I think you have to agree that the people in attendance weren't too pleased with?
Yeah, well, there's 4 different options that were discussed. One was what we just talked about, is keeping the core of the old building, taking down a number of structures, newer structures that are around there, keeping the school of nursing, and then taking half the parking garage down, and then building like a connector with apartment units in it. They go over to that building so people could go from the parking garage to the old part of the hospital. And then there would be a lot more green space created by having that garage down, and the lawn would be opened up again, the great lawn that was in front. And then there would be some additional townhouses built, and also a multi-purpose building on Genesee Street where the new parking lot is. That's the one that seems to be the one that would be most economically feasible because of the tax credits, et cetera. The others one was all houses, which just is economically possible.
What houses? Single family houses?
Single family houses. Well, these are the options that were being considered. There's not being recommended.
I see.
These are just.
I see.
In other words, what is possible there? So that's one. The other one was a blend of townhouses and apartments, and there was one other option. And really, the 3 others I don't think would work economically. And it got down to, it looks like it would be the one that would be recommended. I can't speak for everybody. Would be the first one that I just talked about, and it's the reuse of the old building, and with the multi-use building, commercial space on Genesee Street, keeping the School of Nursing, and then there was a new addition for more apartments running between the garage and the old hospital, and then half the old garage was taken down to make garage more green space, and it would be public space for the neighbors to use too.
I talked to John Brown, and he didn't know really the answer to this question either, because I guess it depends on what kind of monies we're talking about. But the issue that I'm interested in is, obviously, a lot of people in the neighborhood would not be happy if it becomes a low income or what they call affordable apartments or what have you. They're looking more towards market rate property and real estate. And what I'm wondering, though, is if you take government money, does the private developer have to have some type of low-income apartments or what they call affordable apartments? I don't know the answer to that. Do you have any clear?
Well, I think the most likely occupancy would be senior apartments.
Okay.
That's different than low income apartments. Okay, so there's different grant money for that. But I think the thing that would probably go over the best, from what I'm hearing other people say, would be, over 55 senior, 1 and 2 bedrooms, and also market rate with the, single people, working people. No large apartments with more than 2 bedrooms, and that would probably be in keeping with the people that live here now, as far as the general age of the people, et cetera. So I think that there are two different things. It depends on where you're going for the money. I think anybody going for historic tax credits would probably lean more towards the market value of about with senior citizen occupancy. Nobody's talked about affordable housing. That is affordable housing. Affordable housing, which is like public housing or anything like that. That was never.
Yeah, you mean like Section 8? Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, that was never mentioned, and I don't think anybody's planning, from what I understand, to introduce that. But it's what the developers come back with, what they're going to propose. It isn't, this is going to go out to some developers and they're going to market.
Well, but the point I'm making is sometimes developers are sort of have their hands tied, given the kinds of government funds they go after. There's some regulations.
Right. So that's all yet to be seen. So no matter what the neighbors want and or don't want, eventually the market's going to determine what goes there, because and as I said, because it's historic, that's going to control a lot of what happens there.
So you seem pretty encouraged that the powers that be, we'll just use that term, the powers that be, are really going to take advice not only from your committee members, but also from the general public and especially the neighbors. You seem kind of pleased about that and optimistic.
Yeah, because 2 of us are on the committee, and they've had the first meeting, invited everybody, and there's going to be another meeting coming up of everybody. I don't know where that's going to be and when it's going to be, but everybody's going to have a chance to respond to what they present. But in the final analysis, it's what the developers present that's going to count, right? Because the developers they're going to bid for the opportunity, and then they're going to come back with a plan that kind of fits what the group has decided would work best there. And it's up to them to start putting together some packages and get their financing and decide what's going to work best and what they're going to look like. And then at that point, that's when approvals come into place and zoning and building permits and historic rules and regulations. And at that point, everybody's going to have a chance to respond to that again.
One last question to you.
Yeah.
I was wondering, as you know, the first public meeting was in November. Then they said the second one was supposed to be March. So we're a little behind that. I guess we're going to have that in April. I was wondering, from your meeting, did they give any indication as to when they expect to wrap this in a package for the developers to have a public meeting and tell us what they've decided? Do you have any indication as to when that might be?
No, all I know is that they're planning the next meeting, and hopefully that will be in April. After that, then it'll have to go out to the developers for like bidding process, RFP. That's got to be a a couple month process. By the time they get it out and review them and get it back, and then they have to award it to a developer, and then the developer has to come up with some plans and proposals. So I think we're quite a few months off. But by the time,
do you think we'll see something like that transpire this year, or do you think it'll be next year?
I really don't know. I think you should speak to somebody in the economic development area that knows that. But I think it could happen this year.
Very good. Well, Ron Coccaro, we very much appreciate your time, and thanks for volunteering on this committee. And I'm sure you and the committee members are going to give some good advice, and I just hope they listen. Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
The next steering committee member we can talk to is Lindsay Bonanza. And Lindsay has been a very active participant in things South Utica. We haven't heard from her a while, and then all of a sudden she popped up on a local radio station, and you're active again, Lindsay.
Yes.
So what caused the change?
Well, I was very excited to see a new mayor be elected to the city. I have a long-standing relationship with Mike Galimi, and I was very excited to see that he won the election by a landslide. I also liked that we had some fresh air on the Common Council, and I just thought that it was kind of a new chapter that could start for Utica. Since the last 12 years has kind of been a rinse and repeat sort of government.
Well, we certainly do have some new problems, because now, for people that don't know, we used to have a couple of hospitals, well, actually 3, but St. Elizabeth's here in South Utica has closed. St. Luke's on the Utica-New Hartford border has closed, and we have a spanking new hospital right dab center in the city of Utica. So South Utica residents are very concerned as to what the redevelopment plans are for St. Elizabeth's Hospital. And so what they did, as part of what they did, is they formed a steering committee, and Lindsay has been appointed. Why did you agree to join?
Well, once I realized that it was basically a newer committee, like they had replaced quite a few of the members that Mayor Palmieri had appointed.
Yeah, like himself.
Yes. I realized that the new people on the committee were a very well thought out and well placed group of people, and I was very excited to sit among them.
I made this same comment to a couple of the people that I've interviewed so far, and really the kudos have to go to whoever put this together, because they're a varied group of not only professional people who are well aware of things, real estate and construction and all that, but very active members and neighbors. So you really have to applaud the person who put this together. And I'm assuming it's Galimi with his chief of staff.
I agree. I think it was a combination. I think, Mayor Galimi sat down with Mike Gentile, and they thought about a group of people that would work well together, a group that, knew each other. I mean, most of us know each other from being around for a little while. And I also think that, they probably worked with some of their city officials and kind of came up with, if we're really going to make a meaningful impact at that site, I think it's, we need to have a group of people that truly understand the pulse of what goes on in those neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I felt it was a very meaningful, thought out group of people, which is not always what happens. A lot of times what happens on those types of committees is people are placed there because they have the right last name.
Right. Exactly. Well, okay, let's get right to the issue. What is your understanding of what the neighbors want to happen to St. E's? And do your thoughts differ at all?
So I think it's a combination. I've been speaking to neighbors for years. I think when our neighborhood challenge started, with the city, 5 years ago now. I think that we all want the same thing. We want to preserve South Utica, and South Utica is a very special part of Utica, and anybody who's lived here knows that. Our houses are beautiful. We really are a small community in a larger city, and we have it's a community feel in these small little neighborhoods that run off of Genesee Street. So it's different. I'm not saying the other neighborhoods in Utica don't have that as well, but South Utica has its own version of those neighborhoods, as East Utica, North Utica, and West Utica do. So, but each area of the city kind of has its own feel, and I think that South Utica has a very special and unique feel to it. Even when we have businesses come in along Genesee Street, they're not eager to knock down those old historic buildings. Instead, they build their businesses right inside of them. So it keeps the character and it keeps the integrity of the scenic and historic district that runs along the entire Genesee Street, corridor.
Did you go to the first public meeting?
I did not. I was out of town for work, but my neighbors who were there were sending me a lot of details about it.
It was probably the antithesis of what the neighbors expected. Do you agree with that?
100%.
Okay, so here's the situation. I want to know, you had already, to my understanding, a first meeting of the steering committee. I want to know, what do you think the function of the committee is, and do you think the powers that be will actually take their advice?
So I think what's interesting about this particular project that is unlike many other projects in the city is that I think that the people involved know that if they get it wrong, that they're literally changing the entire future of Utica, where normally that's not something that normally happens with a smaller scale project, right? Like a normal business that wants to, a normal hotel that wants to build a hotel in North Genesee Street, right? You're not exactly impacting an entire neighborhood of residents when you're on North Genesee Street building one of those new hotels, right? Mm-hmm. But when you're smack dab in the middle of a residential neighborhood in a historic building built in the early 1900s and has such a meaningful place in the history of Utica, I think it's different. And I think that that's what makes this one, I think that's what's going to make the powers that be a little more careful on this project. I don't want to say that they're going to listen to everything, because nobody ever listens to everything. But I think that they understand that this particular location, what happens at that location will impact how South Utica functions forever.
Well, I wanted to follow up a little bit about the actual plans, because the first public meeting, they did go over some plans. And as I say, talking to everybody, they weren't, after the meeting, they weren't too pleased as to what was presented. But I wanted to get your personal views. For example, I've talked to people like Tim Julian, our a legislator for Oneida County, and he wants to tear down the whole place and start anew and have actually the city or the county buy the property. And then you have, people that are satisfied with what was presented or want low-income housing, but I think they're in the minority. So what does Ms. Bonanza have as her goal for that property specifically?
So I have two main goals for that property. One, how are we going to responsibly use it? And when I say responsible, I mean, we are a city that gives out pilots like, a Tic Tac, right? We have a lot of large scale properties that are owned by people, and they're given 20 plus year, pilot programs where they don't pay taxes into our tax base. And I think that, I'm not saying that those organizations and those groups don't do wonderful things for our community. But at the same time, this is a very large piece of property, and we have to be very responsible in what we do with it, because we have to understand that no matter what we put there, it will impact our community resources. And every time you impact the community resources, that's money out of the taxpayers' pockets, no matter what's there. Whether it's a multi-billion-dollar corporation that's putting boatloads of money into our neighborhoods, or it's a not-for-profit. Regardless, our city resources will be used no matter what we do there. So it has to be something responsible. What can our city handle, and what can our city handle now and long term? So that's one. But two, the other piece is, what's going to keep the character of the neighborhood? What's going to keep us from becoming the neighborhoods of West Utica after the mental health facilities closed down? Now they're just sitting there and they're empty. And it's land that's not being used. So we don't want to end up in a situation where we have this large piece of property that's just sitting there doing nothing. Because when you leave the door open for that kind of stuff, then you're still opening up the door where, it's not a responsible thing to do for the city, because we're still going to have to maintain the property. Somebody's still going to have to keep an eye on it. We have to make sure people don't break in and cause havoc in there. And it just ends up becoming, a bit of a headache, as all of the large properties in Utica that have ended up being abandoned become.
Well, one thing that goes against the Julian plan, I think, is that everybody is talking about the developers and the monies that they have to get. You talked about it, from various sources in order to complete. In other words, the economics of their plan have to fit. The historic credits seem to be a key factor, and that would necessitate keeping at least that one part of St. Elizabeth's upright. And the other thing that I wonder about, and I guess I'm going to have to eventually talk to Brian Thomas, is I'm not sure what kind of government funds. There's a basket of government funds that you can get for these kind of projects, but I'm not sure what projects or what funds you have to have so-called affordable or lower income housing, which I think most of the neighbors are against. Do you have any clear explanation of that?
Yeah, one thing I will say about any low income housing project, I've said it on multiple radio shows. I've said it repeatedly. I've said it for over 5 years. It is not Oneida. Oneida County is a very large county. It is not Utica's responsibility to handle the housing crisis of Oneida County. We have plenty of other municipalities within this county that can build low income housing. It does not need to continue being built in the city of Utica. They do not build money into our tax base. They don't do it. So, I mean, no city is built on anything that's considered low income. And that's just the unfortunate truth. And we have a lot of other municipalities within Oneida County that have large scale buildings that are empty, about to be empty. And that if you wanted to reutilize something, there's plenty of places to put it. It does not need to continue being put on Genesee Street and into our neighborhoods. That's just crazy, in my personal opinion.
Here's the problem, though. If the regulations of whatever funds they're getting say that you shall, isn't that a problem?
I don't believe that will be the case. That's what I'm going to say. I don't believe that. One thing I learned over my personal neighborhood battle with the city was that information is very rarely accurate. There is no such thing as the only thing you can build there is something that's low income. That doesn't exist. There are plenty of other things and plenty of other places to look when it comes to building a large scale project. The reason why developers find that kind of development attractive is because it is guaranteed government money. Meaning, right, if you get a Section 8 person, a person who receives Section 8 living in your apartment, you're getting a guaranteed fee every month that person lives there. You don't have to worry about hunting down somebody. You don't have to worry about a huge number of your residents not having a steady stream of income. So I think that's why that becomes attractive. But on the other side of that, you also have to look at how these larger low-income buildings are doing in the city right now, and they're not doing very well. And I don't mean that as a slight to anyone who lives there or the management companies that are managing them. I think we're in a different time. I think our world is very different. Therefore, people behave very differently, and I think we're just in a unique time in life. I think every neighborhood, whether you've got apartment buildings or single family homes, I think neighbors in general, people in general, just act and move differently than we ever have in the past. And so when I say we have to have responsible development, right now our city can't handle the amount of fire and police calls that are going to these large buildings. If you add another one into our city, I would be concerned over the amount of resources that it would take.
Well,
in that incident.
What I'm getting from people, though, is there's a type of housing that seems very palatable to the neighbors and people around the South Utica area and actually the city. And that's if you put some kind of senior housing in with the market rate product.
So from, like I said, I would be hesitant to label any of the apartment portion of it as anything specific, because as you know, and I'm sure as a lot of people know, is that grant money becomes available for all kinds of different reasons and different groups of people and things like that. So I'd be hesitant to label it as a market rate building or a senior building, because to be very honest with you, once a developer comes along, a developer may have a whole different opinion of what type of client they would like living in their property. So I think to pigeonhole it right this minute is probably not something anybody should be doing, because nothing's been guaranteed. So it's kind of hard
I think it's not only what they would want, but what they cannot economically do. And unfortunately, as we stated in the beginning of this interview, they're relying on government money in some form or fashion. But I want to wrap up. You had your first meeting, I think it was March 15th of 2024, of this steering committee. We're already a little behind because in November at the first public meeting, they said they're going to have a second one in March. We had a thing or two, a problem of the budget. And so I'm sure that's why it was delayed. It was supposed to be in March. But I guess it's going to be maybe the second or third week of April. What do you see as the timetable for when we actually get a developer and the developer puts in front of the neighbors and the public what the actual plan is? Do you think that can be accomplished this year, or do you see it for next year?
I mean, I don't really know how, I have to be honest with you, I don't really know how that works. And it really didn't come up in conversation during our meeting. So, but I would say it probably is going to take a little longer. I don't know. I would say if anything could come available, it would be late fall, but I truly am not sure, because what came up during that meeting was very meaningful conversation. And there was a lot of conversation about what Utica and the surrounding area needs as far as housing. And we currently don't need low income housing in Utica. So that's why I'm saying, like, we have to look at those things. There's a lot of vacant apartments places. There's landlords, trying to get rid of properties because they can't get tenants. So I think that, what the market is looking for is a little bit different than what some of these projects brought forward in the past. So I would say that the consulting firm that they brought forward, which was also another meaningful group of people that really were putting a lot of hard work into this project, I think they had some really good, the group posed some really good questions that they hadn't thought of yet. And I think that that's a good thing. So I think that means that they're going to go back and they're going to take a look at some of the stuff that was mentioned during conversation, and they're going to look and see what plans they have and what monies are available and what types of things we can do moving forward. So I think it's still going to be a bit of a process. I also don't see the current mayor or the current common council, for that matter, approving a large scale project on a quick in a quick turnaround, because every time they've done that in the past, the project ends up becoming a bit of a stressful topic instead of something that benefits the community. So I really think they're going to take their time on this one. At least that's the feeling I got.
Well, Lindsay Bonanza, we very much appreciate your time today and look forward to touching base with you perhaps after the second public meeting. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
That's the end of this episode of Morris Matters. Join us for another episode filled with interesting and informative guests and topics. In between podcasts, you can keep up with important news by going to morrismatters.com. Feel free to react to our website or podcast by sending an email to denofdiscussion@gmail.com.